Toastmaster Mohammed AlAmer, Consequences of Speech.
Thank you, Toastmaster Yahya. Timer. Communication is an easy word to understand, and we rely on it on a daily basis. Also, communication comes in two forms, verbal and written. Well, since we're in Toastmasters, I'll be focusing mainly on the verbal communication side, so I'm pretty sure that everyone here is very familiar with those terms and what does it mean. However, I'd like to emphasize in this speech on what are the aspects that enhances the verbal communication and modifies it into something powerful. Let me start with something that is popular, that is not very well utilized by us. It's facial expressions. So you remember the beginning of my speech. I was changing my facial expressions. First, I was uninterested, then I was angry, then I was happy. Now, when I combine this with words, my message would be way, way more powerful. Let me give you an example. Today, I'm very upset, and this is not acceptable. There are also other things that could enhance your verbal communication. Things like movement, stage movement, or hand gestures. People can actually know what is your personality type by just seeing you walking. They don't need to hear you talk. Let me give you an example. So number one, number two. So the first type is usually an introvert. The second type is an extroverted person who's very sociable. And you'd be wondering, why am I talking about stuff that are so basic? Why, Mohammed? This is level 2. Well, that's important. While that's true, I thought it could be very important for me to remind you about these, because it's a good segue for what I'm going to talk about next. Miscommunications. Miscommunications are very common, whether it's in corporates, team projects, friends and families. Usually we fail miscommunication because we fail putting ourselves in the third person perspective. Or in other words, putting ourselves in the other person's shoes. It usually results in a conflict or a disaster. And going through these consequences of miscommunications are really painful. Wouldn't recommend. Let me give you an example on a big scale, and then we'll dive deep a little bit into smaller ones. Would you believe it if I told you a company as big as NASA lost almost $125 million due to a small miscommunication mistake? Well, this happened due to a failure on both parts. NASA company itself used the measurement systems of metric, while the other contractor used the measurement systems. It's really a silly mistake, but it cost them this huge sum of money. And I'm pretty sure there are much more, I'd say, sadder examples that lost people's lives. Now let me talk about something on a smaller scale. Miscommunication could lose us years of friendship, decades of brotherhood. A wise friend of mine once told me, Mohammed, is it really worth it for a small misuse of words to be a deciding factor for your relationship with your friends or your family? That both sides are arrogant enough not to try to understand the other person's point of view. Say that in 5 years, you work in the same job, same position. Maybe he's higher, maybe you're higher. You'd have a difficult job experience. It's gonna be weird, like Faisal said, because we're weird. So the gist of what I wanted to talk about tonight is that to raise awareness about